Hey everybody, welcome to another meeting of the Research Triangle PowerShell user group. We are a community of PowerShell pros that get together and talk about various aspects of PowerShell. It's an opportunity for people to learn and understand more about the PowerShell language and how it can help you do your job. Tonight we're going to be talking about AutomatedLab. We'll get into that in a second. If you'd like to find out more about our group, you can find us at rtpsug.com, or you can find us on Meetup. You can search on Meetup. You can look for Research Triangle PowerShell user group or RTPsug. The benefit of joining the group is you get to come and join us in person, and when we have our presenters, you'll have a chance to ask them the questions. And if you're watching this at home, check us out. We'd love to have you in the future. So my name is Mike Kanakis. I run the group along with my co-host here, Phil Bossman. Hey, Phil, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, so what are we going to be talking about tonight?
We're talking about AutomatedLab.
AutomatedLab. All right, so just for the people watching at home, just give us a quick one, like 30-second. What is AutomatedLab?
AutomatedLab is a PowerShell module that lets you build labs, call it labs, but virtual machine labs in Hyper-V, Azure, and then also with VMware.
Yeah, and I think the benefit is that you can build multiple types of labs, and so you can go from one lab to another lab and blow it up and rebuild it, right?
Correct.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to turn it over to Phil. We're going to walk it through. And so the only thing I like to explain to the people watching at home is this is not a classroom session that you're going to learn AutomatedLab. This is a feature presentation of what AutomatedLab is possible. And because it's an interactive presentation with people in the room and online, people are going to be asking Phil questions, and we may go down a path that we didn't plan. And so we have no idea what the end result of this demonstration will be tonight. So please keep that in mind when you're watching, and we'd love to have you at the next meeting. So come and join us. All right, Phil, take it away.
Yep, thank you. All right, again, as Mike stated, I am Phil Bossman. I currently run the PowerShell user group here in the Research Triangle area. Where this all came from is what is AutomatedLab and why did I want to present it? And I'm working on some other stuff. And the idea is that Mike quickly talked about earlier is that, hey, we had an environment where we wanted to demo like an Active Directory environment, and we wanted to give people access to it, and going, well, how do you build an Active Directory out of nothing? Like, hey, I want to give Jeremy access to the Active Directory, and I want to use it. Same with Jermaine, and I want to basically let's all work together and kind of do this in a demo. So about 4 weeks ago, that's when we did this, and we did that. It's on YouTube. You can certainly watch that video of us working with that. And then the idea is like, hey, how do I get access to that lab? Well, it got thrown away 20 minutes after the meeting was over. And how did I build it? And so this is kind of a culmination coming back to like pull back the curtains and say, how did this happen, right? And so there's the idea is that, hey, I can use PowerShell to actually, I can use the module AutomatedLab to actually build me an environment. I can do some stuff with it and then tear the whole thing down. And if I did it on my local machine, you're going to see a bunch of stuff on Hyper-V. And so, hey, I just got a laptop with 32 gigs of RAM, and I got enough RAM that I can run a bunch of machines. So I can build it, do what I need, throw it away, and it's just all the same. Same Azure. Hey, I can throw it up in Azure. I can build an environment. I threw up this Azure, this Windows Active Directory environment up in Azure, let everybody connect to it. They did it, they threw it away. It cost me like $7. Woo! So that kind of thing. So that's really also what this is all about. So this is behind the scenes, and then this is not, as Mike said, a presentation on how to use AutomatedLab. This is kind of in that vein, but the idea is we're going to give some exposure to what that really looks like. So talk about what it is, go through components, and then just talk about what capabilities that go from there. So AutomatedLab. So AutomatedLab, you can get to it at automatedlab.com, .org. And so what it is ultimately, and I don't know if it's actually on here as far as who is it, but it was actually, when I'm zooming into the countries where it's exposed. So really, hey, enables you to set up lab environments and test environments in Hyper-V, Azure, and it does have some VMware components, but it's not as rich as Azure and Hyper-V. So it runs in core, and it does a bunch of other stuff, and they continuously update it, and it's actually continuously updated. The two gentlemen who manage it and who work with it. Started by 2 Microsoft employees, and so they're PFEs, Premier Field Engineers for them. And so when they walk into an environment, somebody says, "Hey, I am having a problem with my SCCM environment or my Exchange environment." Like, okay, well, how does Microsoft or those engineers build up a lab that mirrors yours? Okay, so the idea is like you can create what we'll see is a little bit is a lab definition. We're going to create this script that's a lab definition, right? And then in that, you're going to add a bunch of stuff, and then you're going to say install the lab, and it's going to go off and do all the work for you. And so it's just going to start constructing a lab environment. Now, in AutomatedLab, what they've also done is like, hey, this is a single Windows 10 client with Office 2019 in it. So if you actually go to this, here's the script you can kind of see. If you ran this and you had, potentially the ISO to build Windows for the Windows 10 ISO, and you had the ISO for Office 2019, and at the very end of this, 18 minutes later, you're going to have a computer that has Windows 11 on it. And do that. Windows 10 with Office 2019 on it. Just straight up like that with effectively 3 lines of code. Hey, we're defining a variable. We have one definition. So that's the first line. We have to do the work, to do the install. We're defining a machine, and then we're installing a lab. So the crux of this whole thing is 4 lines of code. So that's ultimately what it is. And there are some samples, right? Now, these samples are all over the place. I can't call it all over the place, but the sample may or may not translate as easy as some people think of. And so that's kind of where I'm also going to talk through some of that. So let's go look at some of that stuff.
I would just add that that list on the left for AutomatedLab that Phil just had on the page there, they have some pretty advanced labs.
Yes.
Split domains, all kinds of crazy stuff. It could be as simple as I just want to build a VM for myself.
Yeah.
Desktop VM, or it can be I want to build a full-scale domain with 4 domain controllers, and
we're going to kind of talk to some of that
environment, Exchange, SQL. The point is that AutomatedLab is a tool to give you the ability to build the lab that you want, and it can scale up to as big as you want, but it could also be very simple.
Correct. So that's we're going to kind of see through some of that in this demo as we come along. And so it is as simple as just go install the module. There's an install module. The name is AutomatedLab. How to get the latest, where it's right there. So if you actually ran if you installed the module,
finish it in here.
If you actually installed the module, what you'll actually find out is that you get a bunch of other components with it. Okay, you're going to get the module itself, and you're going to get a module that is the common stuff, basically other stuff, components. I guess what I'm saying here is that it itself is built into a couple of pieces so that it's modular itself. It can add other components to it, right? And so there it is. So then this is all the commands in the module itself. And so I've actually done some sorting here effectively. And so just as far as talking directly to a lab itself, what it can do, you're going to say, hey, we're going to get the lab. We can install the lab. We can remove a lab. We can import a lab from somewhere else. We can export it to somewhere else. We can connect to it and a bunch of other stuff. So it has a bunch of components. Hey, we're going to set up, we're just sorting. Hey, we can set up web apps, right? So talking to Azure, it has enough components inside of it that can do all that other stuff. So this is just all the core stuff. We can come back in here. So it talks about lab definitions. We're going to talk about lab definitions in a little bit. Some of the unattended stuff, some workers when you're talking about virtual environments. And then, hey, there's some VM stuff, VMware stuff. All right. That's what I wanted to do here, is that how much stuff is actually in it. So there's 418 commandlets actually in it. So it is combined all the pieces that you need to be from there. that can do a bunch of stuff from there. Where it is. So we scroll to the top. So kind of talked really on that in that demo we kind of talked before is that this whole thing to build a simple Windows 10 client with Office 2019, you can run the whole thing in 4 lines of code. Well, it just needs 3 lines of code, right? At its core. Hey, we are going to create a lab definition. We're going to give it a name. We're actually going to tell it what hypervisor type we're going to use, whether it be a local Hyper-V or it be Azure or VMware, right? We're going to say, hey, we're going to add one machine. We're going to add a lab definition of a machine. Got to give the machine a name. Got to tell how big you want it. And then we're going to tell what OS you're going to give it, what OS type, right? And then effectively, you just say install. And we'll actually see this go really fast. It should go pretty fast. Oh, look. This is actually an actively working module because you can see that, hey, they've already done an update. Actually, I looked at this. So earlier this week, or actually I think late last week, he did a new version. So they just pushed the new version to it. So I haven't installed it because I wanted to kind of see that in this demo itself. So there is actually, what I have installed is 50, and 51 has now been released because they're fixing bugs at this point. So really what you see at this point is that it starts and it's using this framework to do some logging. So it's really good at logging itself. And you see quickly what it's doing is hey, it tells you who you are. It's creating a lab definition called basic. It says, hey, this is where I'm going to define my configuration itself. As far as sources, and we'll look at sources in a little bit. And then, hey, here's all the ISOs that I found in the sources that I can use to do installs with. And it says, hey, I'm going to add this machine. Well, the machine is actually the network. So it's got to define the network. Hey, we're going to use that basic network. How basic is it going to be? And actually going to create the VM itself in this folder. These are all pretty much defaults, right? So we're going to build one machine. Hey, it's going to create the machine, but it finds out that it creates the machine. Actually, this is the machine I need to create. The way it works, and we'll see it in just a second, is that it creates base images and uses deltas to actually create individual machines. So it's not building, you build 10 machines, it's not going to build you 5 independent, BMDKs or VHDXs. It's going to build you a base and then a difference from each one. So each machine will be independent, but there will be a base, and it's the base OS. So the additional disks, hey, it's going to build basic PC1. It tries to already did because it already exists. And then it's going to go and wait for the machine to start up. We'll see what's the machine.
So Phil, I wasn't listening for a few minutes. I had to deal with something. You do have to download ISOs, right?
Yes. Yeah. You actually have to have the installs for themselves and stuff.
So it'll build the shell of VMs, but if you want Windows in the VM, it has to have an ISO to read from.
You have it check like all the prerequisites are there, like the actual ISOs actually exist, all this stuff before it kind of like waste time essentially trying to build everything. It's like, is there hey, check my prerequisites first and then
yes. So as far as the you'll find out a little bit is that it will search through the entire ISOs folder as we see at this point. And so I put into this folder the original ISO for Windows 10. Right? So here's the ISO for Windows 11 and then 2012, and it's just any ISO. And so you'll find out a little bit later is that, hey, I want to install, hey, the Citrix environment. So there is the ISO that I'm going to eventually need to install Citrix, the Citrix entire whole thing, CVAD environment, Citrix virtual apps and desktops. Well, I need that ISO. Stick it in the ISOs, and then when it needs it, it's going to go get it. Okay, it will mount it. It will do a bunch of other stuff from there. All right, any other questions? So, hey, if I needed to install SQL, of course, it's there as well. But I have to have the ISO for that version of SQL that I'm using.
And I'll just add that all the major manufacturers trial versions of their products. You can pull down the Windows ISO, right, and you can run 6 months or so before it'll expire. And I think Windows you can reset it 3 times.
I think it's 90 days. Right?
And so you don't have to own these products particularly to just build labs. The idea of the lab and the whole idea of AutomatedLab is I spin it up, I do what I want to do, throw it away, right? Because I can just build it again easily. We don't have to worry about like, how am I going to run this at home? It's going to expire in 30 days.
Yeah, it's not your major driver. It's not your, your daily driver. No, because it can't be, right? Because it's going to have to refresh itself each time. Okay. So kind of talked about, idea with lab sources, and we'll quickly talk about some of that, is that if you're going to do other things, so hey, if it's going to look for, the ISOs themselves, if you're going to create Windows updates, it will you can give it some commands and slipstream your ISO. So, hey, I want to do any prerequisites for my Windows, just because, hey, that's the ISO for Windows 10, but it's like 3 months, it's like 3 years old. I want the latest version. Well, you can slipstream in Windows updates. You put them in here and you give it some commands, and then it will rebuild your base images that you'll go from there. So it's smart enough to do all that too. You can, it's weird to say, it's an advanced topic to try and slipstream that kind of stuff, but it's possible. Let's put it that way. Okay, so, and we scrolled up here, it was already doing something. It was waiting for the VM to start, and then it created some RDS certificates so that you can RDP to it, and then, hey, it was done. So granted, in this form, if we run, you can see at this point, it gives you a report. It says, hey, it finished this work. It installed this lab, but it had all the dependencies, so effectively just turned on the lab, and it took 5 minutes to turn itself on, right? And so it can give you a bunch of details on it itself. Hey, what kind of network are we working on? Hey, it created my PC. Here's the IP of the machine that we just created, or that we created at some point, the OS, and the username and password to log into it, right? And so we'll define that later on too. It gives you some other details as to things you can do with it. You can run other commandlets, get VM status, you can get start, stop VMs. You can run commands we'll see later. You can get enter-PS sessions. You can install software. It's kind of cool. Think about through that. So I kind of put at this point, go like, hey, that didn't really matter because it took 5 minutes. But what I did actually before is when I built this lab the first time, I copied and pasted the entire thing. So it went from nothing to where it is today, and kind of I just turned it back on. But it took 17 minutes. And so I didn't want to like demo, hey, 17 minutes of waiting. All right, let's talk about the weather, And so I went from absolutely nothing to 17 minutes later having exactly where I was. And so in this fashion, if I had to completely wipe this out and put this on a brand new machine, I got to wait 17 minutes, at least on this machine. But if you have a faster machine, maybe faster. But again, this is just from bare bones and nothing to full of VM, right? So one of the other things I could have done is just import the lab. Like actually, so we've already imported that because we ran it. We don't need to do that because I actually ran it. And then what can we do? So enter the lab session. And so this is that machine. Host name. What do we want to run on that machine? DIRC Windows. I don't know. But I am inside that VM itself. So I PS remoted into that machine that is sitting on that machine. So now I can work from this machine as I need to be, right? Any questions there? I know it's kind of like a little abstract of like, hey, what's the effect here? But just like you're remoting into some random machine that you across the network and that kind of stuff, now I'm just doing it in a virtual machine on my own machine. So I can work from that. I can install software. I can, shut it down. I can reboot it, get uptime, that kind of stuff. Right? So with that. All right. So we've already imported the lab. So there's also, so now, hey, we have a lab. We've already built it. Now, what do I want to do with it at this point? Let's see, stop lab. So you're going to stop the lab VM. Yeah. So at this point, so I want to import that lab again, just the definition for that lab. So at this point, is we have a lab. How do I want to make changes to it at this point? So there is the ability to then take a lab you've already created, which has that definition, which was this other guy before, right? Come on. Oh, I hate this thing. This is my definition, right? It created my definition. Now I actually want to make a change to it. I'm going to add a new server to it. So I'm going to take that definition. I'm going to add a new server. Well, it didn't do anything. What happened with it? So now we're actually going to install that lab again. We just installed it, but we changed its definition. So you see it's doing exactly what it did before. Everything looks pretty similar. We just did what we just did. But hey, it tried to build Lab PC. Oh, it was already there. Now here we go. Hey, now I'm actually trying to install a lab server, but now a new server. So I took actually, if I didn't really talk about what that is. So I created another machine, added to that definition. I called it, basic server. How much RAM do I need? What's the OS? Before it was a Windows 10 box, I think. Yeah, Windows 10 Pro. And now it's a 2012, 2022 data center server. So because I have the ISO for 2022, it'll build it and it will go from there. And it's going up. It's going to build it. Actually, it built it already. And now it's actually installing file server services. So it's going to say, add Windows feature, file services, and doing it. So I'm not touching the machine, and it's going to go and it's going to turn on the machine, wait for it to come up. Here it is, and then, hey, enter the PS session, add Windows feature, wait for it to reboot, do its part, and then it's going to come back to me.
And it does this outside of your own user context, right? So you can specify like a secondary domain or a tertiary domain, and then automatically specify credentials. So you don't even actually have to have direct networking access to it.
Correct. Well, you have to be an admin on this interface with Hyper-V.
Yeah.
But that's all you need at this point.
Yeah.
Because you're creating, because you'll see, we'll kind of look behind the scenes a little quickly here, is that here's all the machines, and I already built most of them, right? So that they're, and here's it's kind of hard to see because this won't zoom in.
So it's already designed for guest interactions then.
Yes. So I guess at this point, so you need admin access on this machine.
Yep.
Because it's going to build networks for you in Hyper-V. It's going to do that kind of part. But that's the only rights you need. So you can, yes, there are build a domain that is, a 3 feet domain, and I'm going to create accounts. And so I know some of you guys here are from the ISSA, right? Or you come back from the security world. And so you can go look on GitHub, and there are pen testers who use AutomatedLab to build a testing environment to actually pen test against. Like, hey, I want to run my stuff in that lab over there. Or, hey, I want to do some pen testing against that kind of configuration. Boom, you can build your lab in with some advanced tweaking. Just, hey, I need the lab to be in this form. Okay, I need these patches. I need this part to do this. I need a domain controller that has this. I need a web server that has that. Okay, I can build all that. You just define all your components, go, and now you have one there that is available to you, or that is there. And because you're putting in all the parts, you can easily, put the credentials you need.
So Phil, there's a couple of questions or comments. I just wanted to pause.
Yep.
So we can get caught up. So Stephen Judd was making a joke about, wow, server 2022 with 2 gig of RAM, that's going to take forever. But actually, my experience is that running Windows with a thin amount of RAM is not actually too bad, especially if you're doing it local on a decent machine. Someone was asking, can it be installed on remote hardware? And so absolutely. I don't know if that was clear. Phil started to talk about that in the beginning of the meeting.
Yes.
He's installing on his laptop from convenience. He doesn't have to deal with connecting the servers, connecting to Azure, connecting to GCP. But the target that you install our AutomatedLab 2 can be essentially anything. It could be a VMware environment, Azure, it could be another cloud, it could be a local machine, it could be a server on your network. Yeah. You just have to have the credentials and the path to get there.
The easiest barrier to use is Hyper-V running on your local machine. That's the easiest. It's the easiest to stand up. Okay, we'll actually see in just a little bit. Is you could I would say the next easiest, or probably, is going to be Azure itself. Hey, define the Azure subscription you're going to connect to, and it's going to then do all the work for you. That's kind of what I have demos we can show. All right, and then Hyper-V, VMware itself. You just connect to a VMware environment. You got to give it the credentials, and it will then build all the components for you and go from there. So you could do any of that. I actually don't have an environment to do Hyper-V on a remote Hyper-V host, but I probably can. I just don't know the commandlets off the top of my head.
So when we did this demo, which was I think 3 months ago, Phil, we were showing off, like we were doing a demo to show people some common things that we do in Active Directory searches and how to build reports. And when we were trying to plan the demo, we were like, we need an Active Directory for people to connect to. And so we didn't want to have people coming into his org or my org. So what we did is we built an Active Directory and we hosted it in Azure. And we basically just opened it up wide open for an hour so everybody can get to it. Yep. But so Bill built that demo that we did a couple of months ago in the video, where he provisioned an Active Directory domain on an Azure VM, and I think that Active Directory domain had like 5,500 users in it. And so it's just a target, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit of that in just a little bit. So yes, all of that. And so to Stephen's comments is that, hey, we built it again. We stood up that other machine, and this whole process took 14 minutes to run. So again, I'm talking through a bunch of stuff, and we get a bunch of other stuff, but we can go from there.
Alan wants to know why you wouldn't do this in like Kubernetes or Docker.
That's the whole point.
It's a different beast.
No, I was gonna.
So my
you don't have the structure to do it inside a Docker container.
So this is building a lab environment of Windows VM hosts and that entire structure. There's no container for an Exchange VM. There's no Exchange server that. There are containers. And I get SQL in a container form, but that's something else. That's not this.
And I think there is actually Windows containers, but they're essentially, it's just as easy to use a VM.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, you can't do this in a Linux container. It doesn't have the bits to be able to make it run.
Correct. So, so we kind of talked really before, is that there is a commandlet saying, hey, go tell me the available operating systems. Basically looked at all the ISOs and said, hey, here's all the operating systems that based upon the ISOs that I have available to me that I can build OSs for, right? So I can get the lab definition. So I guess at this point is we kind of said, hey, this is that basic lab we kind of talked about, but this is also PowerShell in that form, is that because I then got into the lab definition, what comes back is, oh, I get this report. It's not really in that form. This is PowerShell. Everything's a freaking object. That's just the default, but format list of what that is. It is an object with all these properties inside of it. Okay. So I say that because this is, the variable is called def lab, is the definition of the lab that I'm working on right now. And so it's got some names. Hey, there's a property that's called machines. That is the names of the machines that are in this lab, right? And so, hey, what are the sources of where you get the stuff? Hey, what's the target? Where are you going to put the lab itself? All this stuff. So I guess the point is that you got to think through this two-part, is that you're building a definition to a lab, then you're going to use some commandlets to actually modify that definition. And at the very end, you just call something called install lab, and then it starts everything. Okay? So we're going to get lab VM. Any questions at this point? So
I was just in general wondering, like, for example, with Active Directory and Exchange, you have to install Active Directory, then extend the schema, and then install Exchange.
all that.
How does it know when something's done? How do you say this step is done?
All of that code is in the box.
Yeah, because it's
They've
got
done all that work.
Since it's got
Okay,
rights
so-
to be able to do guest transactions, I would imagine it's like tailing the log and monitoring the log and actually before you back up.
We're kind of see some of the, let me get to that. So I'm going to get all the, so again, this is just PowerShell. Hey, so we have the option to do, get stuff, and we're going to stop things. So that point is that, and so we really can kind of see at this point, hey, these VMs are going to stop in just a second because, hey, they're getting shut down. So I can use PowerShell to actually interact with the lab itself. That's kind of crazy, right? Then we're going to say a standard lab. So what we're going to do at this point. So home lab. So actually, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to say import lab, the name, and this is PowerShell, right? So it has tab completion. It can do things. I want to import some other lab. So which one? We're in home lab. Again, I'm just going to import the lab. It's going to go and figure out. It's going to validate the lab definition. Make sure that you haven't messed with the XML file that it created. It created all the pieces and validate that you can do it. Right. So it's importing that definition into my running workspace right now. Okay. And so the reason I'm kind of talking about that is I ran all this before, right? And it took 34 minutes. We are not going to sit here for 34 minutes and do this. We're going to import the lab definition. We're going to import the lab, and then we're going to start the lab. And then all these pieces are going to come back up again. And then that's going to come up in faster. Actually, you know what? Control-C. I'm going to say no validation because I just don't know where it's at. So we're going to say now if I see this get lab all, hey, there's all the machines that are in this lab. Right? Yeah.
So just to clarify,
Just power them all on.
when you were doing the import lab and you were tabbing and you had the list of labs that you can import, those didn't come down when you just installed AutomatedLab. You built a bunch of labs
Correct.
ahead. So when you install AutomatedLab, you're basically going to be at 0. There'll be no labs ready to go. You can build your own lab. You can import some labs. Phil's saying he built all those ahead of time so that he can go through them.
Yeah. I want.
And that's kind of why I said what I said in the beginning. I mean, we're skipping some steps here.
Yeah,
So
this
you can
is
see some stuff, and so you might not put it together when you do it on your own and be like, "Where's all the labs?" Phil built them, so we can have different labs to look at.
Yeah. So we kind of saw when I was like tabbing through all the names, is that's what all these are. So it creates. We saw basic. This is what's actually the lab definition. It's going to create a bunch of XML files so that it can generate all the pieces. And so what it did is it just iterated through this folder. I created a lab called Home Lab and Cloud Lab and Citrix Lab and Azure Lab and just a whole bunch of other ones. So I said, new lab definition, ran it and said, install. It created these folders. And so now at a later date, I can come here and say, import that lab. Right. So now in this workspace, now I have the ability to do that.
And so those XML files and those definitions are just coming from those scripts he's got at the top with the tabs across, which are basically just a set of values that he wants for his individual labs.
Yeah.
Right. So you would build a script for each lab that you want, and it'll build that definition, and then you can just run it over and over.
Correct. I can then import this lab. And so let's quickly look at what this lab is. And so we kind of talked about what are those things. Is that, hey, so I created a lab and it actually has 2 network definitions, right? So, hey, is the lab itself, so it's its own IP space, right? And then we created another one called uplink. So what this is going to do is, you'll see in just a second, is, hey, there's my domain controller. And because we're using PowerShell, instead of, running off to the right-hand screen, I can use splatting and I can say, hey, the name of this affected machine is going to be whatever the lab name is. Then I can use variable extraction, right? So the lab name, whatever the lab name, the DC1, right? Again, 2 gigs of memory, 2022, but I'm using the desktop experience version, so I can actually remote into this 2022 server. Hey, and actually it's going to give it a role, root DC. So it's going to actually install 80 sites and services, and it's going to give it the root domain, right? Well, kind of in that fashion, you can kind of see like, hey, I can add 5 DCs to it. I got to give at least one of them the root DC, but then the other ones are just domain controllers, right? Hey, what network am I going to use? We kind of talked about with the network. So this domain controller will be on the private network, right? And then the domain it's going to call, we're just going to call it that instead of .com or .internal, I'm going to call it .lab, right? I create a new network adapter, right? And at this point, I'm going to give the router DC. We're going to give it another server that's going to do routing. So it's going to have a leg on my local, outside, and it's going to have a leg inside of inside the lab itself. So it's going to be on a private domain, and it's going to be on my local computer, so I can see the internet. That's really what we're trying to do here, right? And so at this point now, because I'm on the host, I can talk to it, but in a typical form, the lab itself is its own isolated port. So it doesn't have internet access, right? It routes to nothing. So in that fashion, you need to create a configuration, and it's kind of documented, and this is how you do it, is 2 NICs on some computer that's going to have the routing services. And so all the computers inside of, actually, when I finish this. So then PC, then lab name, the PC, it's going to be Windows 10 machine. It's in the lab network. So the domain controller and the lab PC are on the private space. And then there's going to be another DC that's on both sides. And the lab PC and the domain controller, they're routing, their gateway is that other computer. And then it will pass the traffic beyond so that they can live in their own world and only out to the internet. Got it? So we go from there, and this took 31 minutes, and now they're all here. Questions? So
Roles?
Huh?
For the roles?
Yep.
Like you're using names that aren't really part of role services inside servers. Did you define those sets that you're using?
AutomatedLab itself.
AutomatedLab.
Inside the AutomatedLab. So let's go look at all the roles or about roles. Here's all the list of roles that they support. They've created a role, and what effectively the role is a set of scripted actions that will do it. So ADFS, okay, or ADDC, right, or DHCP services. What does it take to take some nothing and install DHCP services on the machine, right? So they created that code to actually do that for you. And so you just say, this is a DHCP server, and it will install whatever it needs to get DHCP services running on the machine, right? That's all it needs, right? And so, yeah, the first child DC, hey, file server services. So you just put one of these names in here, as you can see, root DC, right? So you can't create a domain without a root DC. And so it's just root DC. It's not, but it will install the ADSS roles, it will install those pieces. And that is kind of in the product itself, right? So same thing with SQL Server, it will install those services for you without having you thinking through, what are the components I need? I need all these other pieces. You don't have to do it.
So earlier, you were asking about extending the schema. How does it know, wait, tailing the log, all that stuff? That's how it knows. So the point is they've built the things into the lab so that you don't have to do all those steps, right? So think of it as like, if you're an experienced AD admin or a SQL admin or Exchange admin, and you've built these services over and over and over again, and you've got your list of 50 steps to get from I have nothing to a working lab, if it's AD, with users and OUs and services, they're trying to eliminate as many of those manual steps that you have to do, where you have to go and fire up an MMC and install a service and do all that. So they've built roles to automate that stuff for you so that you can just put it into code and say, I need an AD lab, I need a root server, I need a DHCP server, I need DNS. And you just say DNS, DHCP, root, and it does the work for you.
Correct.
Do you usually just add steps after that, or you actually will modify some of these files to the way you want it?
So that's exactly where I'm leading right into that question. Is you saw in the lab sources folder that there is custom roles, right? That's when you install the whole thing, it will install these for you. The custom roles also there. So that's kind of how it's doing some of the work. So some of the things that it needs scripts to do, and if it needs, so config man 2022, all the scripts that it's using are in here as well. So if you wanted to modify itself, what it's doing, you can do that, or you can create your own script itself and say, hey, I'm going to create a role that's my own name, and this is my version of, SQL Server. Do it, or you can just use that. So you can get as deep as you want to go, and there is a mechanism to create those custom roles. And so there's documentation. What are the pieces you need inside of it? What's it look like? It needs a name. It needs this. What happens when a host starts? What happens when a host ends? And then any other comparison. So you need those 3 to start, and then go from there. It goes from there. So then you'll be able to then, hey, install this role. Hey, it found it, and then it will do whatever that needs to do. So there, excuse me, it is extensible in that form. Where were we? Oh, we have this VM running. Enter. So one of the other cool things is that we can say get lab VM RDP file. I want a lab RDP file for each one of those machines we get. Well, what does that give me at this point? I need to put it there. Oh, put it in there, but actually I want to typically put it somewhere else. And see labs RDP. This is home lab, and it's going to overwrite one there. So hey, now I have a clickable RDP file that will automatically take me into that machine without doing anything. So let's go actually do that. C labs RDP, home lab one, and then what do we want to jump into? Domain controller? Yeah, we're going to domain controller. There, now it because it created the RDP file as is, it didn't ask me for password or anything because it added it to the RDP file itself. So I didn't have to actually get the ADF, MMC or MTSC and enter the username and password. I didn't have to worry about that. I didn't care because it was inside that RDP file, right? And so this is that domain controller that was created at some point in time. Actually, not that one. This.
Excuse me, was that for your profile or was that file like for your 12 different admins?
This is
RDP is saved into the folder structure for the lab. It's not user specific.
Yeah, so if you actually looked inside of an RDP file, it actually contains the password, that the username and password. So it didn't prompt you for the username and password. And so
I'm just saying, can you do it for 1 or 12 admins at a time?
can you do 12 or
You mean share the RDP file with multiple people?
No,
yes.
but in the RDP file so that they can all log into the new instance immediately.
But you can only have 2 people logged in at the same time.
So you'd have to turn it
Right.
and, install,
Like you already has.
RDS licenses and all that kind of stuff to do multiple people at the same time, right? So all we did effectively is we built the machine and then we created an RDP file to that machine. And by using an RDP file, we don't, so simply this can be connect lab VM. I don't want the basic one, I want the, which one? I'm going to say PC2. Hey,
You
so
mean
this
a
looks
window?
similar, but now I need to know what that username and password is. I need to go, okay, so it would have been .administrator.
You
So
were
this
talking
looks similar.
file to, to associate yourself with the host, but you weren't
No.
talking about password file. I'm sorry.
No. I didn't.
Bill's not logging in as Bill.
Yeah. So this commandlet created an RDP file that had the username and password of the credential that I need into this file. So when I actually launch that file, I didn't put in the password. That here. So here I'm connecting. So I'm connecting. So I put something else in. So I'm saying no. Where is the other one? So the RDP file, it just says, hey, there is no, there's a certificate thing about what this is. And so that's what this is. What do I want to map kind of thing? Don't show me this again. But I say just connect. And it logged me in as you saw quickly. I don't know if you saw it, but it logged in as home lab administrator.
It's in the BG info file that's on.
Yeah, I get that. It's a totally different thing, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's who logged in. That's who this was. Oh, log off. Finding out. Come on. All right.
Remember, guys, don't overthink this. This is about trying to make your lab setups easy. Most people that are doing labs are logging in as the administrator or 1 or 2 test users. We built a lab that had 5,500 users in there, and we used like 3 IDs, right? This is not a lab where you're going to go in as 50 different users. I mean, obviously you could do that, but this is really built for speed and portability. And so most people say, all right, I just need to get on as the admin, test what I want to do. Yes, I could log on as a domain user and have less privileges, but I don't think that's really the context that most people use labs in. I think if you took a poll, most people are logging on to their lab to practice. And if it's AD, they're logging on as a local, domain admin. Oh, let me see what it's like to log on as a schema admin. Let me try to get across the forest. They're not, maybe they replicate the experience of what a user might see. But the point is you want to get in and out of these labs effortlessly. So you're not really worried about passwords. So you see Phil put the password on the screen earlier, some pass one, right?
Yeah.
You're not worried about that part. You're worried about being able to move around the lab in an easy way.
Yeah. So you could certainly create a script that will create the other accounts that you potentially need that aren't in. That's kind of what we did later on. We'll see some of that. But let's table that discussion, kind of maybe come back to it, but I will talk about that in a little bit. And so we already talked about, hey, getting the RDP files. Well, why is that beneficial? It's because then once the lab is running, I can then just click any one of those files and I can jump to the machines that I'm looking for, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because I think you can also, I don't know, let's see what we get. Oh, yeah, I can create the RDP files and actually use my own local credential. So it won't put the password in there, so it's got to tell me who's going to log in, right? So you can choose that the RDP file, let's go from there.
Phil, the only reason I asked that is because we used to do an RDP file that had a common login to a common desktop so that my remote admins could all do the same thing with the same thing, like the credentials and everything on the same machine. So I'm thinking about it in such a small way. So I apologize, but I get where you're going.
That's a great point. And this commandlet won't do that, but you could just as easily build an RDP file that will do just that once the lab has been created. So that's not a problem to actually create, but that's not in the box. How about that? So once the lab's running, hey, we can do other things to it. So at this point, what it's going to say is that, hey, I want to invoke a command on that machine and see what happens. So what did I do? And so it's got some other things. So as far as logging is concerned, you can add, hey, I'm getting some folder info and passing through. So this is PowerShell. So I can get that and work with it. So this looks like the directory structure of the program data folder on that DC, right? Same thing here at this point is now I'm saying on the PC, hey, can the PC talk to the domain controller? Well, there it goes. So that is that I get onto the PC, go to the domain and ping the domain controller. Can you see each other? Yes, you can, right? And so same thing. I can run whatever I want as far as PowerShell itself on those remote machines. So let's go to the domain controller and see the domain controller and what's on it. So, hey, this is just all the services that we installed that are actually installed. So I actually ran some, it could be as complicated as you want, but it's all wrapped inside of here. So I could have put an entire script or doing whatever. And then we're doing some other stuff here at this point. Oh, then formatting tables. So we're just doing a bunch of, it's PowerShell. You can get as crazy as you want. You can get as complex as you might need. Questions? We're going to keep going. So this is where we went down this complex lab. So this is a Citrix lab environment. I'm not actually going to start this because this is going to eat up a bunch of memory, but effectively you can see at this point. So this lab got built out. Let's see, hold on. Come back here. I think at the bottom I put how long it took. No, I didn't. Oh, I thought I had it somewhere. I'm not going to go looking for it, but it's here. I want to say this was like 53 minutes to just build the entire thing. And so what it did, I know we don't need to run through everything it actually did, but I created a lab that we called it Citrix. This is an entire Citrix environment in a lab, and it was built in like 50 something minutes, right? And so what it is, and it's all living within 192.168.70 namespace, default switch. We created the default switch, and so this is that two-part thing. So all the machines inside the lab can see out to the internet, right? I added that ISO from the Citrix ISO to the definition so that when the lab itself needs to use the ISO for Citrix, it knows where to find it. It adds the SQL Server ISO as well, so it knows where to find it. We then use PS default parameter values. So, hey, I'm going to take a bunch. Anytime we define a lab machine, we're going to say its network is always this. Tools path, the domain is going to be this. What the DNS server is going to be, how many processors the machine should have, and what the OS should be. So for all the machines we build, this is going to configure to be, right? So its default's going to be that. Hey, that's the defaults. So the lab, here's a machine. The DC itself is only 1 gig, and it's going to be the root DC. Hey, we're going to create a router. The machine that's going to be the hop. So we create that just so that every single machine doesn't need to be on both sides, so that it can live in its own space. That we showed that before. Here's an app server. Hey, I actually give it an IP address, so this is where it needs SQL services running on it. So this will install SQL services, and when it needs to go, that's the server it's going to use. We have a Zen app server. We have a Zen desktop server, and it's actually going to be that OS. So I guess the other point is this is where, this is the complex one. This is a really big one that takes a whole long time to do. Hey, we went through that whole thing, and inside this script itself, it comes here and says install the lab. All it did was it turned on all these machines and waits for all the machines to be sitting there waiting. Once we did that, we come along and we say, hey, I'm going to checkpoint everybody. I'm going to run a VMware, a Hyper-V checkpoint, and say, now everybody's at a frozen state. Now we're going to do that. All right. Once everybody is in a base, now I'm going to come along and, hey, we're going to start adding some Windows features to things. We're going to go add all these Windows features to the app server. Then once we installed all that, then we're going to go and just reboot the machine. Just wait for it. Right? Once we do that, hey, we're going to come along, back onto this same machine, go get this host, and then install these features. So it's going to sit there and churn along and build everything for me. So we went from, hey, build a lab in 3 lines to, holy crap, I'm halfway through this and I'm only at 140 lines, right? So keeps going along. Hey, we're going to go attach to that ISO. We're then going to install like SQL Local DB for there. This is actually the install itself of the delivery controller. Install the Zen desktop components. We're gonna dismount the image, and then for all the actual session hosts, we're then going to install some software. Hey, it can install software too. Oh, so this is install application. We saw it at the top. Is I can reach out because all the lab machines are connecting through a router. Like it can see the internet, so I can tell that machine go install Chocolatey or like whatever. I can do that. So there are other labs that do that as well. Install application, and then these are the labs we want to install. Install, what is this? It's C++ redistributable. Hey, we're going to install those. Install SQL, licensing services, Zen app servers, and then it finally runs the detail. But we can't actually see this because I didn't put it somewhere, at least in here. So this is actually, if we turn all this on, and it's going to probably eat about 18 gigs of memory to turn them all on, but it's a fully working Citrix environment sitting inside of a machine. So I can log into a client machine and log into Citrix and demo that environment. And I say like Citrix, but hey, I can then launch Citrix Workspace and do a bunch of other stuff. So in that world, and so that's kind of what my world is like. Questions? So I don't really kind of talk through some of that, but it can get as complicated as you potentially need.
I have one.
Yep.
Please go first. I've talked a lot before.
Oh, no, I was going to ask just for all these that are pre-created, do you often encounter major bugs, or it pretty much always works? Like where it's just like there's fatal errors or anything, or these are really stable environments that.
They're pretty stable, but they're pretty vanilla. How about that?
Okay.
So if you're kind of going back to the idea of here, like some of these like it's really odd is that actually straight out of the box, it won't install Exchange yet. Like that's kind of a weird thing, because this was built many years ago, and so some of the demos are still just really, really old, and they may not work in that fashion. So I've seen where it threw errors, but it threw errors because it just doesn't do that anymore, right? So hey, here's a demo there's a lab that will give you a 2008 R2 server. You can't even install that anymore. Find the menu for a 2008 R2, right? So, but the reason I point this out, because I don't really use this and like, hey, I'm going to copy and paste this. I go, what is it trying to do at this point? What are they doing like that? So I use that as examples to give me other stuff. Or when I was doing some development at that point, I knew that this existed. And so I then went and searched GitHub and who else is running that and kind of things like that. Or you can simply put in requests to the developers themselves, and they may often give you some ideas on how to build stuff. So people put their lab building definitions online, and so they're in GitHub. And I had mentioned earlier is when I built the one that we did a couple of weeks ago to build out our AD in Azure. The code that I used to do some of that was actually stolen from some pen testers to actually build out the new AD users and stuff like that, to actually loop through the environment. And so we'll get to this one in just a little bit, but this created, all right, so we'll come back to this quickly. So Cloud Lab, I think it was the Azure Lab one. Where's my Azure Lab? Infra? Yep, Infra. Infra one. So one of the things that when you're building a machine is you can say, hey, I can define a post-install activity. So what that really means is that, hey, once the machine is up, hey, I'm good. Now I want to assign it to do some work after the fact. And so when I built the environment in Azure, hey, once it was up, what are the things that I wanted to do? It's actually
Was suck down an AD directory from a different server.
Well, essentially,
you potentially have to grab that, export it out. So here's kind of where we're at this point. And so I told it to say, run this script, new AD lab accounts on the domain controller once it was built in Azure. Well, what did it do? It also, it got all of these accounts. It's just a CSV, and it does nothing more than, hey, import the CSV, and then, where is it? Oh, this was creating it. Get AD user. Where's the add? There's an add in here somewhere. But effectively, I wrote code. Where is it? Oh, here it is. So it got all the lab accounts, and then it created an OU for every single based upon what was there. All right, and then it created AD groups, and it just stuck them all in.
It's not just bringing it down, but it's projecting it to whatever you told it to, right?
So up until this point, before Phil talked about this, everything that Phil was talking about was basically building the bones of a lab, the infrastructure. So now what Phil is basically saying, what fun is an AD lab with no users? I just spent all this time to build a lab. The last thing I want to do is go in and have to create 500 users. So he wrote a post-install script to then populate the AD directory with users. And he's saying that the lab can read a script he wrote and do the post infrastructure build. So he has not only a lab, but the lab has data.
Yes. And so this is like generic data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. This is generic data, but there's no reason why you couldn't, like this says, go connect to a real domain controller and pull out all my users and duplicate all the AD groups and duplicate all this. And just, it'll be like the SIDs won't match and all that kind of stuff, but it'll create all of that kind of, you can suck it and export out of your own domain and then put it into this one. You can, but that you could do that absolutely, and then you can like freeze it in time. You can snapshot it and keep it at that point.
So a really useful case. So a couple of points I wanted to mention on things that Phil mentioned in the last 10 minutes. So I wanted to ask you, Phil, when you built the Azure, the AD domain in Azure for our demo a few months ago.
Yeah.
Do you remember roughly how long that took to run?
52 minutes, 36 seconds.
Okay. What I was going to say was that these times are relative.
Correct.
Because some of this is Phil installing the lab on a laptop, maybe single proc, a bunch of RAM.
At this point,
right?
this is reaching into Azure, and Azure did all the work.
Right. So if you have a VM environment at work, or you can set up a Hyper-V server at work or whatever, or you have Azure, you can essentially cook up these scripts and walk away, and it might run much faster because machines with beefier processors, multitasking, multiple boxes, right? VMware will do all the work. So when you hear these times, this took 30 minutes, this took 15 minutes, this took 10 minutes, that's relative to the hardware that you run it on.
I think that also the fact that this ran in 52 minutes is personally to me is completely irrelevant. Is the fact that I have a repeatable place where I can go, hey, I have a place that I need to say this is what it is, and when I'm ready, throw it away. Just need to know that hey, if I need an environment so I can test this new, our test scripts for our domain. All right, give me an hour. It'll be ready for you. This is the IP you'll connect to.
Yeah.
All right. And now you could do that. Hey, pull out of AD and build a brand new domain that is exactly like your old and go, okay, do whatever the hell you want inside of there. And then tell me tomorrow and I'll turn it off and I'll give you a brand new one in a week. That's an exact copy of what you did.
Yeah.
Some of that work just needs to be built into that's the post install script, but that's your script to customize yourself. Go ahead.
This seems like a really good use case for, like, he's kind of Zion sort of new on a lot of this. So for him to be able to spin stuff up, just break it, turn around.
Right.
But
exactly.
it's not, you don't have to babysit it, right? Once you get the process down, you can just walk away and eat lunch or.
Yes, the repeatability is the value, not the time, the 53 minutes.
Yeah. So a couple of key points about that. Like everybody wants to have a lab to test in, right? And so you set up a lab, and then you have other admins that you work with, other teams, whatever, and you say, guys, it's a lab. Beat the shit out of it.
Break it.
I don't care. Break it. Do whatever you want. And then you have a script, and you can set up a process and say, on the first of the month, delete it all and make a new lab that's back to a state that's functioning, right?
Yes.
And so that repeatability that you said, right? And so, but there is a reality check here that I want everybody to understand. One of the things that I found with AutomatedLab, and maybe some other people said the same thing, is you look at all the labs on the left-hand side, and the first lab is like build a desktop. And then like three lines down is like set up a domain. And then 2 lines down is set up a domain with split this and all this stuff. It's not easy.
Yeah, one of them was like.
And some of the documentation can be sparse.
Yes.
So I think if you asked Phil would say it took him a long time to figure out all these pieces.
Yes.
Right? And so you're not going to go home and you're not going to build a full domain in like 2 hours. It's probably going to be
Camera off.
a lot of work.
Here's.
Turn his camera off.
Can I ask Phil a question real quick?
Yeah.
So, Phil,
Yeah.
I'm a student, but the last job I had was for a global company with at least 50,000 users. And if I wanted to do a simulation in a lab and I wanted to like pipe in 50,000 users to a lab, that's what I was talking about. Like, how could you do that and stress test it by, and then even looking up, how to change something in PowerShell to change something in a 50,000, Active Directory. It's the same thing. But like, how do you make a lab that big is what I'm asking to like generically.
Okay, so there's previous place I worked, we had a dev environment, we had a test environment, we had prod. And as soon as you elevated to prod, you were supposed to clone that back to dev. So you had a copy of prod to develop on.
Mhm.
If you can take a snapshot and use that as your basis, you could put it into this instead of an ISO.
So
Alan,
there's caveats to all of that. And so in to Alan's comment as far as, hey, I want to take a multinational, domain and try and put it into this.
No, that's just one spreadsheet.
What are you trying to test at that
This
point?
one just had-
And hey, you can't stress test. You're not stress testing your that. You're stress testing this, which is a reflection of that. And so, hey, I would just want to. You could, hey, build a lab and put 50,000 records in it. That's 50,000 records. But that's what are you trying to test? And that's kind of beyond that idea.
You're right.
So
You're
it
trying to
gets to the
test how to
ratio.
change one record in 50,000. You're not trying to
Yeah.
I guess I was reaching towards log review, but that's a different subject. So anyway,
well, I would just say that the question that you asked, not really an automated lab problem, right? If you didn't have automated lab and you built the lab, you still have to figure out how to replicate 50,000 users and do all the tests. Automated lab is a way to help you get that faster. And so we showed Windows and we showed AD a little bit, but I think Phil just had a Linux box and the commandlets up on the screen and stuff like that. So that I don't think that's an automated lab thing. But, so I just wanted to finish up my thought from earlier is I think everybody that has used automated lab will say that it's really valuable and useful, but you need to spend a little time because I found that going from lab A to lab B, there's a lot of assumed knowledge. And like I tried to do stuff and I'm like, I don't know how they did that. And there was no docs that go into the level of detail that explain how to get from A to B. You kind of have to do a little bit of creative tinkering. And so I'm sure for this lab that this demo that Phil did tonight, it probably took a few weeks of prep.
So it kind of we're going to jump right into this part is that so at this point now I am going to import a cloud lab. Now this lab is not on the hoster but on this machine. It's actually in Azure, so it's actually not running. So we're going to actually kind of go turn them all on and get this point. So get lab again, just like we saw.
thank you, Phil. I didn't mean to distract you.
No. We're actually right where we going to be at this point. And so hey, so now it is going to then use my Azure. I hope it has enough parts to go get the Azure. Yeah, I think it knew how to get to my Azure subscription. So let's go look to see if we can find that VM. So this is the point I want to make as far as Azure and everything else is concerned. Where's my lab? So we kind of talked before about lab sources and ISOs and all that kind of stuff, right? And so what this is that when AutomatedLab needs to do work, and hey, where's the scripts? Where's the work that it's going to do in order to do work? And so, hey, where's it getting it installs from? Where is it getting its ISOs from? That kind of stuff. Well, it gets it from lab sources, right? And then we did talk a little bit before about yeah, so now I'm going to deviate it quickly. Is that, hey, we quickly talked about where do the VMs go, right? So we built the lab, and then this is the VHDX of that VM. And then down here are the base images of each OS type, right? And so it will add this space onto your local computer, but all those pieces are, right? And so I kind of show it locally so you can kind of see it. And then there's this thing called lab sources, right? So when it goes into Azure, well, it needs potentially all those components again, right? And so it creates a resource group in your Azure tenant, in your Azure subscription called AutomatedLab Lab Sources. And so this is the place where it's that Lab Sources folder. So it creates a storage account, right? Then it creates a file share. That is Lab Sources. I'm going to browse it. This looks kind of familiar. So it takes all that stuff. Granted, when you first connect to an Azure account, okay, and you build the first lab into your EM, it's going to take extra long because it's going to copy all these stuff up into Azure into a storage account. okay? And so puts it all there so that when you deploy a machine, so we're going to come back all the way out to the resource group, I'm going to build that cloud lab, right? So it's building that cloud lab. If we look at deployments, you can see, hey, oh, did it succeed? So it succeeded in that deployment. But we're going to come back to the cloud lab and overview. So what's inside the lab? Hey, it is itself. It is itself a whole bunch of things. Actually, it's three different machines. So did we go look at that? Yeah, it turned them all on. So it started my DC, my file server, and my web server. Okay, all within this lab. So it built. So this is the virtual machine. That is what that machine, right? If you look at all the different parts of what that is, you can connect to those pieces. And let's see if we can actually connect to the machine. So now there is 3 machines running in Azure, all doing this. And assuming that, you can use, it's not doing anything special as far as connecting. I'm not connecting to those machines at this point. So let's say enter. I'm going to collect our DC. Should try and enter a PS session for that VM. There it is. So that's the actual real name of that VM, right? So to that point, but so no, IP config. So on this VM running in the cloud is that whole thing. And this is what we went, what we did a couple weeks ago. I built a domain controller. I only needed one. So I think I built 2 domain controllers, and then I went my post-action scripts before. No, you know what? Here. No, I'm going to do it. You know what? We'll just do it this way. Add to the folder. Sorry. So I then created an NSG that was called RTP SugLab, but I rebuilt this from scratch. So what did we do in that Azure? So I built 2 machines. There's a domain controller in Azure just sitting there, but security rules won't let you talk to it. So then again, I wrote some other post-action scripts to actually go and update Azure so that it will allow me to get back into the machine, right? So that anybody can see that domain controller. So for that hour that we were running a meeting, there was a domain controller on the internet that just had, wide open to anybody who knew where it was, okay, for that hour. But I didn't really care. 45 minutes later, boop, goes away, right? So I guess to that point is that you can build this all into the cloud. And this is the actual scripts we ran the other week, right? And so, yeah, that's actually the run we ran. Then the rules we did to then actually, hey, go get the lab, go get the research group. I created a network security group. I then updated the group to then give me all the pieces so that I can connect to the lab itself, right? So we opened it up so that we can. This is some also, hey, I got the labs. I then did some work with the scripts themselves to go get me some report. Oh, this is based upon this garbage data that I found for users. I then created a bunch of stuff and actually did some reports. I said this person is a manager of that person. So that was all some bunch of things that we worked out in the lab itself, right? And so again, I created some extra stuff to modify the domain itself. So we dumped, like, I think 5,000 users into the domain. And like now you can make sense of it. There wasn't enough information. There was just some generic stuff I found on the internet. So, hey, well, I had somebody call their CEO. All right, well, I grabbed some directors and I made that person direct report to that person. I grabbed some other people and made some direct. I just randomly grabbed people and made them direct reports so that we can have some visibility at that point. So I guess to close that out is that it's just as easy to, right, build machines and stick it in the cloud. But again, it's just its own lab itself. There's no routing out. right? We need to create those other functions that we can visually see on the Hyper-V environment, where you can see that, hey, it's on this machine, but you can't see out. You need to do the same thing. It's just the cloud is just somebody else's computer, not sitting in front of you, right? So the same thing happened. And you can use that code to build whatever you need to. You can do that whole parts. And so we kind of saw is I can use the same scripting that I normally use to enter the machine itself. Get VM status. Oh, actually, they're not all stopped. Right? Because this session itself still sees, the construct of this lab is still there. So I can do things to the lab itself, and it will reach in and grab the pieces I'm looking for. And so we kind of saw lab, the available.
Hey, Bill, there's a question in chat that says, if you are running a script and it errors out, do you have to start over from building the lab again? How does error?
Yes. So you would just you would install the lab again, and the roles have been designed so that it can rerun again. They are rerunable.
So you wouldn't delete everything. You would just rerun your definition. It would just basically pick up where it left off.
So I say that is that the inbox roles that you're defined, hey, if you go and say, hey, reinstall my root DC, it's going to say, hey, you're already a domain controller, keep on going.
Right.
I don't need to do that. But that also means that if you created your own custom roles, right, to do some work, to say, hey, do some work, you need to put some error checking to say, well, am I going to do this again? Hey, my post install is going to add 5,000 users. Well, am I going to check to see that the 5,000 users are already there, or at least do it in a non-destructive way so now I don't have 10,000 users?
Right.
So it just can't just do it blind. So
it depends.
You need to handle. I didn't really want to say it depends, but it depends, right? So it's designed or inbox. It's designed to rerun again. It can be rerun multiple times, and we kind of saw that in the hey, we built the lab, and then we imported the definition for that lab, and then we modified the lab to say, hey, do some extra work. But it's actually in the documentation. Modifying labs. It's kind of like they kind of put it out here. Is that hey, it's designed. You can make changes to the product, okay, but it's not. For example, you can't change the domain that's been deployed. You can't try and do things that will
You
break
wouldn't
other
otherwise
things.
ever be able to do anyway.
Yeah. You can't ask it to do things that just need extra handling anyway. It's not going to come for free. So, I guess as my last piece, because I think that's pretty much where I wanted to be, is that, hey, here we start from something small. We kind of did some modifications, and we kind of talked about, kind of iterated through the idea that we start from really something. Once we have something, we can modify it. We can do some extra stuff. Once it's there, we can connect to it. We can do other stuff. We can interact with it. We can do a bunch of stuff. We can stop, start. We could actually have them interact with each other. We can get pretty complicated, right? And then we can then get very complicated. And the last part is we can stick it in the cloud. And then in all of that whole thing is that you can do post-script actions. You saw we can snapshot machines. We can do effectively. And as we also saw at the very, very beginning, there's 418 commandlets that this thing can do. And it can do a lot, but also it can do individual things. So some of that is unique to Azure, unique to Hyper-V, unique to VMware, but ultimately it can do a ton of stuff. And that's kind of where I wanted to say, kind of, again, this is not a demo, it's like tell you how to do it, is to give you some experience and say what is possible. The reason I also kind of wanted to come through this, and I'm going to talk at PowerShell Summit in a couple of weeks, but the point is that I'm building, my talk there is about, hey, managing event logs at scale. Well, how do you talk about managing event logs at scale? You need multiple computers. So I'm building a lab so that I can, hey, have 15 computers and we're going to forward logs and we're going to do it. Like, I need that. And I can't like, hey, here's a script that I ran. Like that, it's not the same, right? So I needed a lab, and I thought this would be a good avenue to kind of talk through what does it take to build these labs. So that's my talk.
So before we wrap up, I don't want to be the wet blanket that makes everybody sad, but Phil went through a lot of stuff tonight, and he wrapped up with some really cool stuff about multiple servers, installing software on machines, building labs, put it in the cloud. It's all possible. I would not even consider starting there because it can be very frustrating. So you really want to build up in the fashion that Phil did when he started. Learn how to make a VM, right? And master that, and then move on to something else. Because like when I watch these labs, I really want to build a lab. I really want to automate my users, and I'd love to have it in Azure so I could throw it away and I could do it again in 2 months. But the reality is there's a certain skill set that comes with being able to put that all together. Sometimes when you're working with AutomatedLab and you don't have someone to help you, the documentation can be a little hard to figure out at times. It's a little thin. So if you want to do this stuff, you just have to give yourself enough time to practice so you get a little better at understanding the concepts of AutomatedLab. Phil obviously is able to build a lot with this tool, so it's possible. But when you first sit down at the console and you're using AutomatedLab for the first time, it can be a little intimidating once you get past your first VM. So just give yourself some time and don't get frustrated if you run into some challenges. I think we all went through those kind of roadblocks with the tool. But did you say you wanted to wrap up, Phil?
Yeah, well, I think to your point there is that if you wanted to use it, understand too is that there are pieces where when I started with AutomatedLab, we started using it. Yes, I just said, give me 2 computers and go from there. And then I remoted into those computers and I did a bunch of work. And I'm like, okay, I just worked with them at just 2 machines sitting on the network or kind of in their own little space. And then I had to go, well, how would I put what I just did into code so that when I build this again, it does it all for me. So it takes 17 minutes instead of 14 minutes to build. Okay. And then I just slowly built upon that kind of stuff. And then we, again, pieced into that other thing is that actually the complicated one. It does a bunch of checkpoints. Hey, I can create this and then granted, this is all in a script, so you can just like start and go, but there's no reason why actually import which lab do I have running? Like I could come in right now, home lab. You know what? I'm going to open a new window, import lab. We don't want that one. We want home lab into this space. Come on. I don't need to validate because I don't really care, but get for new lab VM checkpoint. Actually, I don't even know what it's called. So get command check module AutomatedLab star check. What's it called? Oh, checkpoint VM. This was my friend when I was working the VM. But checkpoint them all. I don't know. So it's going to go creating a snapshot for every song. So whatever I just did, now they're all going to be frozen in time. And then I can keep doing more work. And then I can freeze them again. And then I can revert because I just screwed it all up, right? And so that is your friend too, especially if you're working in Hyper-V, checkpoint's your friend, right? So I can keep freezing the machines and I can go back to what I just did. And then, so that's also when I was trying to build the scripts to say, hey, am I getting to that stage? Hey, I remoted the machine. Usually this is what I wanted to do to the machine. All right, we'll go revert back. Then can I just do it in code? And then go from there, and we kept going from there. So that's also another tidbit. And thanks, Mike, for reminding me to kind of talk about checkpoints. And you should be using them as best you can. So
You wrapped up.
I'm good. Yeah. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. So remember, RTP SUG meets twice a month. The first Wednesday of every month, we have a virtual meeting, and the third Wednesday of every month, we meet in person. And happy to have you. And look for us on YouTube and join us. And thanks for coming.
Well, let's say thank you to Phil. And so if you're watching at home, we'd love to have you join us at the next meeting. And so if you're interested in joining us online, you can find us at rtpsug.com or on Meetup, RTPSug, you can search for us there. The benefit of joining us in person is what you did not see if you're watching this recording at home is essentially that there was a vigorous discussion in the chat with a lot of questions that Phil didn't talk about that people answered in the thing. And so coming in person lets you be part of the audience that asks the questions and shapes the discussion. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We hope you had a great time. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.